Hello, biology students. Hope everything's going well. Hope things went well with chapter 15. Please feel free to give me feedback if there's anything that either didn't quite work well for you or like the balance of volumes was off or anything like that. I've done a bit of dialing in and testing of my own, but yeah, having feedback on how it's working with your system and just what you find as you went through it is always helpful. Yeah, I'm going to switch to that and we'll go, oops, wrong thing. We'll go that. And so this is chapter 16, Invertebrate Zoology Part 2, the Arthropods. I have all of chapter 16 in this, and I think if, especially when you don't include the videos that I'm going to show, just the content part with the PowerPoint slides, I'm pretty sure all of chapter 16 is going to be shorter than the second half of chapter 15. Here we go. So, Introduction to Arthropods, Chapter 16a. Oh, by the way, same thing as before. You do not have to take notes. Instead, I'll give you a sheet that has questions to answer as you go through this video. So make sure that you have that sheet on hand, that you look at what the questions are, you answer them as you go, and turn that in, and that will do it. I'm not sure yet what things may or may not look like with a test for this material. Assume that we might have a test. So you can also use this to give you the information for your study guide for studying. But whatever that ends up looking like, that'll be after spring break. So we'll talk about that when we come back from spring break. All right, so phylum Arthropoda, also known as the joint-footed animals, and a wide variety of things. We're talking about stuff ranging from lobsters to spiders and insects. A couple of key characteristics. They have an exoskeleton, and the exoskeleton is made of chitin. We've seen chitin come up a little bit in before, mainly in the context of fungi. Some of the disadvantages of an exoskeleton, though, one is that in order to grow, the animal must molt. So when you have like the hard plates, the skeleton on the outside, it limits growth because well, the skeleton is on the outside of the body. And so what happens is in order for arthropods to grow, they have to shed or in some shape or form crawl out of their exoskeleton and then grow a new one that is bigger than the previous one as they are growing into it. So that's one downside, and also just weight restrictions that limits the size of arthropods. The heaviness of the exoskeleton, and as the animal gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it adds more and more and more weight, and it just limits how big arthropods are able to get in order to move their different appendages, in order to move their legs, things like that. So yeah, the exoskeleton limits the size that they can get to. But advantage, very tough, very durable. I mean, just think of like the stereotype of trying to kill a cockroach, and a lot of that is due to the strength and toughness of their exoskeleton. Also, key characteristics, so that was the exoskeleton made of chitin. Next, jointed appendages. Now, so an appendage is any part of your body that like sticks out or is attached to the main trunk of your body. So for us, our arms and legs are appendages. Animals' legs, other parts as well that we'll look at later. So in particular, they have appendages that have joints. Well, so we have joints. I mean, our arm has a joint, our leg has a joint, multiple joints. And so, what's unique about these is not so much that they have appendages that have joints, but rather that the exoskeleton makes the joints visible from the outside. And so, you can just look at the legs of an insect, for example, and you can see, oh, that totally has joints in it. And so, it's how readily apparent the joints are is really what stands out here. So that's jointed appendages, and then body segmentation. So when there are three segments, you have parts called a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And then when there are two, the head and thorax fuse together so that rather than two separate body parts, head and thorax, you have one that is called the cephalothorax. Cephalic, cephalo, again, of or pertaining to the head. So the cephalothorax and then the abdomen. That's another characteristic. And then we have the open circulatory system, with a dorsal heart. So rather than blood flowing through blood vessels throughout the body, like we have with a closed circulatory system, where we saw that with the worms, a closed circulatory system. Insects and other arthropods have open circulatory systems. So rather than blood flowing through blood vessels throughout the body, it is pumped to bathe organs in open cavities. And so it's kind of like, yeah, these open spaces inside the body, and the heart pumps blood through initially vessels just to get it up to the upper part of the cavity, and then the blood pools down from there. So that is a unique characteristic. And then a ventral nervous system. So keep in mind dorsal heart. So dorsal for toward the back, and then ventral or toward the upside, and then ventral toward the bottom side, toward the underside. So they have a ventral nervous system, and some of the characteristics there. Antennae. These are appendages in the head region that provide taste, smell, and touch sensation. And then some arthropods have compound eyes, and a compound eye has many lenses. There's a video later that will get maybe a little bit of a sense of how insects with compound eyes see. And then some arthropods have simple eyes. That's an eye like ours, where there's just one lens per eye. And yeah, so that's it for characteristics. Moving on to subphylum Crustacea. So we have phylum. Usually we think of, okay, kingdom, phylum, class, but sometimes it makes sense to group multiple classes into some size of a category smaller than a phylum, but grouping multiple classes together, and we call that a subphylum. So in this case, we have subphylum Crustacea, also known as the crustaceans. And we have here things like lobsters, crabs, crayfish, shrimp, and barnacles. Most of them are free living and are aquatic. And some of the ways that they're different from arthropod classes, they have two body segments instead of three. We'll see some other arthropods with two body segments, but it's fairly unique in the arthropods to have the two body segments. That's what we have here with crustaceans. They also have two pair of antennae, whereas the majority of arthropods have one pair of antennae. And then they perform respiration via gills. They have gills kind of like fish, slight difference, but yeah. So they breathe using gills, whereas most arthropods do not breathe via gills. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay, so that was that. Moving on. Yeah, just to highlight one cool organ in the crayfish, there's something called a statocyst. And what happens is that it's at the base of the antennules. Antennules are the second pair of antennae that the crustaceans have. And so at the base of the antennules, the statocysts have tiny sensory hairs inside of them. And then also inside the statocysts, there are several grains of sand. And when the crayfish tilts one way or another, the grains of sand roll because of gravity, and it affects or jostles or bumps the hairs. And when those hairs are bumped, it triggers nervous impulses in the crayfish that gives it a sense of balance. And so it can tell, oh, I'm leaning to the left, or I'm leaning to the right, or oh, I'm upside down. And that happens because of literally grains of sand bumping into hairs in this small structure at the base of the antennules. When the crayfish molts, in order to grow, it molts the part of it that has those grains of sand. And so it actually has to find new grains of sand to put in the statocyst. And I got to look into exactly how it does that, because I haven't looked up that detail yet. But anyway, cool design. We have a similar thing in our inner ear for how we maintain our sense of balance, but it works a little bit different from that. But so yeah, that is the statocyst. All right, then another subphylum that we have here is phylum Chelicerata, and it's named after the chelicerae, which are these mouth parts that these arthropods have. And these mouth parts can be like claws or like fangs. And mostly we think of the subphylum Chelicerata for class Arachnida. These are the spiders. Well, mainly spiders. We'll see that there are other arachnids other than spiders. But some of the common characteristics of arachnids that make them a little bit different from some of the other arthropods, they have 4 pair of walking legs, giving them a total of 8 legs. We'll see that mainly as a difference from insects later. They have 2 body segments, so it's like, well, I thought you said that 2 body segments was kind of unique when we talked about the crustaceans. That's still true, especially when we look at how many of the arthropods are insects. So spiders and crustaceans, relatively small parts of arthropods compared to how big of a group the insects are. So yeah, 2 body segments. They don't have any antennae, no antennae at all. And then they have a respiration by book lungs, and they're called book lungs because these tiny, tiny little lungs inside spiders, when they look at them, they look like pages of a book that are all layered one on top of another. Um, so entomologists call them book lungs. And then they have usually 4 pair of simple eyes. This is one of the places where, yeah, we see simple eyes. There are other arachnids, though, such as scorpions, mites, and ticks. And I grabbed some pictures here for you. So scorpion, you're probably pretty familiar with those already. Most scorpions not super dangerous. It's kind of surprising. It's just this way with animals sometimes. It's the small scorpions that are actually the most dangerous as far as their sting is concerned. So scorpion there, and then here we have a mite. This is another scanning electron microscope image of a type of dust mite. These things are teeny tiny, and they crawl around like too small to see with the human eye. They crawl around in dust, and we even have things like this living on our skin, and yeah, almost like makes you itchy just thinking about it. So mites and then ticks. This is, I think, the black-legged tick. There you can see that body part is fairly flat. The ticks usually known for their latching onto a person and sucking the person's blood, and then their body gets really swollen up with blood. We have ticks in this area. One of the things that ticks are known for is transmitting Lyme's disease, which can have a variety of symptoms to it. One of the main things is just typical like fever and stuff like that, but it can have some lingering effects. I know some people have Lyme's disease more on their, like doctors and whatnot, have Lyme's disease more on their radar than others as something that might possibly cause, well, play a role in affecting the body in a variety of ways. It can end up demonstrating symptoms outside of what you'd usually think of with Lyme's disease. Let's see, that's that. Thought I was saying something about ticks, but I'll hold off on that for right now. Okay. A little video here about spider.
The desert sands of Namibia are home to a remarkable miniature acrobat. The golden wheel spider turns on a performance that rivals the tumbling floor routine of any gymnast. It's an escape plan designed to foil its main predator, a parasitic wasp. Even within its carefully excavated burrow, this spider is not safe from its persistent hunter. As its sandy fortress is penetrated, it cartwheels away at a rate of 44 revolutions per second, the equivalent of a car travelling at 300 kilometers per hour.
That's one way to get around. Was it just me, or did the narrator of that video really sound like Emma Thompson? Emma Thompson, Sense of Sensibility, Saving Mr. Banks. What else have I seen her in? Oh, she was married to Kenneth Branagh for a little while. Oh, she was the novel writer in, or the author in Stranger Than Fiction. I'm sure a lot of other stuff. I mean, a lot of other stuff, but that's some of what's coming to mind right now. Oh, she also did the voice of Mrs. Potts in Beauty and the Beast. Anyway, that really sounded like her to me. I don't know if that was her or not. All right, another one.
While spiders may not give people the warm fuzzies, many admire their intricately spun webs. One zoologist's quest to document the spider's web crafting process led to studies showing the effects of various drugs on spiders and possibly humans. In 1948, H.M. Peters kept falling asleep while trying to capture footage of spiders building webs around 2 to 5 a.m. He asked his workspace roommate, pharmacologist Peter Witt, who was studying drug effects on humans, to figure out how to get the spiders working at different times. Witt went about this by feeding the spiders drops of sugar water mixed with drugs like marijuana, peyote, and morphine. Webs still were spun at the same time of night, so Peters ended his quest. But the resulting web abnormalities mesmerized Witt as he tested additional drugs like caffeine and LSD. He continued to study spiders, which didn't require as much time or money and weren't subject to legal regulations or animal rights advocates, until he ended his experiments in the 1970s. Then, in 1995, NASA replicated Witt's studies to measure the toxicity of different drugs. Similar to Witt's, NASA's results showed how each drug creates a unique pattern of non-functional behavior and web deformities based on the drug's toxicity. Surprisingly, the ever-popular caffeine seemed to produce one of the most deformed webs.
That show the different effects, or the different ways the spider's web came out when they were put on different things like marijuana and LSD and heroin and caffeine and stuff like that. And it's something else. Spider web, silk. If you take like a silk thread, a silk strand, at whatever diameter it is, and compare it to the same diameter of steel, silk is way stronger than steel. And it's also just fascinating how spiders, both how they make their webs, how they're able to make some of the silk that is sticky, some that is not sticky, and the different patterns that different spiders make. And don't have time to get into it, but that's a fascinating topic in and of
Well,
itself. Moving on, another one. My sisters were in high school. The principal of the school that they attended had a terrarium in his office with a pet tarantula, and sometimes students would come in just to ask if they could hold his tarantula for a little bit, and he would let them sometimes. It was safe to do, but yeah, definitely not something some people would want to do. Okay, moving on. Chapter 16, Part B, Class Insecta. So when we talk about class Insecta, the insects, approximately 80% of all animal species are insects. We're just talking about a huge number of different species. I mean, think about all the different kinds of animals that there are, because we still haven't looked at a lot of your typical animals like your mammals, your rodents, none of the aquatic animals, all the different kinds of fish that there are. Think of all the different kinds of jellyfish that there are that we looked at earlier with the cnidarians, and yet all of the other kind of animals combined only make up about 20% of the different types of animal species, and insects about 80% of them. Some of the common characteristics of insects, they have 3 pair of walking legs. So unlike the arachnids that have 4 pair, insects 3 pair, so a total of 6 walking legs. They usually have wings. About the only exceptions are usually animals that some forms of them have wings, but other forms don't. So like for example with ants, some of the types of ants in a colony of ants do have wings, but the majority of them don't. So that's why we say usually wings. And of the wing types, there are 4 different wing types. There's membranous wings. That's what you think of when you think of like a fly. very thin, see-through kind of a wing. Then there are scale-covered wings. That'd be like butterfly wings. It's actually like, yeah, like tiny, tiny, tiny scales. Like you think like scales of a fish or scales of a snake. These like tiny scales that are attached to the wing, and that if you touch a butterfly wing, those scales rub off, and it almost seems like a fine kind of a powder. But we'll see a little bit more about the scales of a butterfly wing with one of the videos later. And then a third kind of wing, leather-like wings. These would be like the wings of a grasshopper. They are, I mean, as the name implies, as the name says, they're kind of like leather. And then horny wings. Horny wings are stronger and thicker than the leather-like wings. These would be like what beetles have or what ladybugs have. They're thick, strong. Um, yeah. So 4 different wing types. And then insects are known for 3 body segments: head, thorax, and abdomen, and then 1 pair of sensory antennae. And then mouth parts. Uh, they have a labrum, which is like the upper lip, mandibles, those are the chewing parts, maxillae, a pair of feeding appendages, and what those look like especially varies a lot depending on how the insect eats. Are we talking about an insect that sucks blood, or are we talking an insect or blood or nectar? Or are we talking about something that chews food or something that uh, secretes some kind of a digestive juice and then kind of sucks up like through a tube, instead of more like a spear kind of a thing through a tube, the food that is digested? So yeah, the feeding appendages can vary a lot. And then the labium is the lower lip. And then I have a note here, I already kind of touched on this, that the design of these parts varies dramatically among insects depending on how they obtain their food. Insect digestion: 3 main parts of the digestive system: the foregut, the midgut, and the hindgut. So in the foregut, food enters the foregut through the mouth. The food is moistened with saliva from the salivary glands before passing through the esophagus into the crop. From there, it passes to the gizzard, where it is ground. So there's the crop and gizzard again. We'll see it in birds. We saw it with worms. And here we're seeing it with insects. Salivary glands. That's the first time we've seen salivary glands come up. We have salivary glands, produces saliva. Insects do as well. And then the midgut. Midgut is essentially the stomach, and the food is digested by digestive juices, and nutrition from the digested food is absorbed. In insects, most of the absorption takes place in the midgut. In us, most of our absorption takes place in our small intestine, our small bowel, which would be essentially like the hindgut of an insect. But the hindgut is lined with exoskeleton type materials, lined with chitin. It's not very absorptive. So that's why most of the nutrition absorption needs to take place in the midgut. And then hindgut, basically the intestine. Water and salts are absorbed from what's left, as what remains is passed through the rectum and anus. That's the gist of what's going on with the digestive system. And then respiration and circulation. So there are 2 structures to talk about here, two terms: trachea and spiracles. So insects don't need lungs or circulatory systems. They don't have blood flowing through them. I mean, they do, but it's some of them do. No, wait, hold on a second. Arthropods, beetles, yeah. They don't need lungs. That's largely what it is. And then the circulatory system plays a role, but trachea plays a larger role of what's going on here. So instead, they have small pores, spiracles, that run along the sides of their bodies, and these pores allow oxygen into trachea, which are tubes that branch through the animal, and oxygen gets to all of the parts of the insect that needs it. So they have these tubes that run all throughout. Oxygen enters through these little pores on the side of the body, and the oxygen flows through the trachea, or you can kind of say flows through the trachea, passes through the trachea throughout the body, so that the different parts of his body that need oxygen can get it from the trachea. And insect irritability. Irritability here we mean responding in some shape or form to a stimulus. So it might be like, it's not like, oh, I'm so annoyed kind of irritability. It's a response to a stimulus kind of irritability. And some of the different types of irritability: that insects have. Oftentimes, they have sense of smell, sense of taste, antennae sensors that can sense any combination or some different combinations of these, or sometimes something slightly different. Sense of sight, usually with compound eyes, and sense of hearing with tympani. So tympani are essentially like eardrums. I mean, our eardrums in our ears are called tympanic membranes. Uh, Tympany or tympanic, I think, just means something like of or pertaining to a membrane. I don't remember for sure though. Anyway, so tympany. What's interesting is where the tympani are located in different insects, and so in particular, like for example, grasshoppers, their tympani are located back toward their rear legs. That's where their sense of hearing happens. Is yeah, toward their rear legs. Yeah, so insects usually rely on a combination of these different senses in order to live their lives. Insect metamorphosis. One of the unique things about insects is how they uh, take on different forms throughout their life cycle. And we can talk a life cycle that might last years or a life cycle that might last hours. It's crazy how short-lived versus long-lived you have in the variety like that in insects. So two kinds of metamorphosis. There's incomplete metamorphosis, which is only about 10% of insects. And there are three stages to incomplete metamorphosis. There's the egg stage, the nymph or naiad, and the adult. So what a nymph or naiad is, nymph is land dwelling and naiad is water dwelling. And what they are is they are essentially miniature versions of the adult. They look like the adult, but they're not fully formed yet, and so they're a bit different. And if it is, yeah, on the land, you call it a nymph. If it lives in the water, you call it a naiad. So some of the insects that have incomplete metamorphosis are praying mantises and cockroaches. There are some others as well, but well, like praying mantis, think of a praying mantis kind of similar to like a grasshopper, to a cricket. Those also have incomplete metamorphosis. And so what happens is what hatches out of the egg is a nymphonaiad that is like an adult but a smaller, less fully developed, and then it finishes developing and becomes an adult. Contrasting that with complete metamorphosis, this is what about 90% of insects do. They have four stages: egg, larva, pupa, and adult. So what happens is a larva hatches from an egg, and that is a small worm like kind of a thing. And we call them different names sometimes depending on what type of insect we're talking about. So, like the larva of flies, we call those maggots. The larvae of mosquitoes are called wigglers, and there are others as well. So from the larva stage, then it enters a pupa stage, and you probably are most familiar with the pupa stage with butterfly. That's where the larva forms a cocoon around itself, and as is there as a pupa, it undergoes more development and then emerges as the what am I trying to say? As a fully formed adult. Sometimes though the pupa stage is a little more fully developed. I'm sorry, that's not what I'm trying to say. Is kind of like the larva. It's fairly active. That's what I'm trying to say. It's fairly active. It's not just like mm, hanging out in a cocoon for a while. It's out and about. It's eating, etc. The larval stage of a butterfly we call a caterpillar. Speaking of butterflies, there was a company that I worked for a little while. It's called Swallowtail Farms, and it was a butterfly farm. And what it was is they raised monarch butterflies and packaged them up with ice. The butterflies would go into kind of a semi-dormant stage when the temperature was lowered, and they could overnight them to anywhere in the country, and people would buy them to do butterfly releases at weddings and funerals, mainly those two events, but other events as well. And so what we would do is we would go into greenhouses where the butterfly were sleeping, because we go in early morning, like 4:30, 5:30 in the morning, when the butterfly was still sleeping. When they sleep, usually they would be sleeping on milkweed. That's the type of plant that the butterflies prefer to eat. The monarch butterflies prefer to eat. And they would just be hanging out on the plant, their wings folded, so their wings upright together. And we would just pluck the butterflies one by one, put them in some kind of little bag. I think oftentimes it's just like a paper bag, and then take them into the packaging room. And the packaging room, what we had is we had kind of triangular boxes where each one would hold a butterfly. So the butterflies were individually packed, and we would put the butterflies in the boxes, however many person was ordering. Let's say they're ordering like 2 dozen. We would package 13 butterflies for every dozen the person ordered, so that just in case something happened and one of them died or one of them wasn't active enough, that people still feel like they got their money's worth. And yeah, package them up, put the ice pack in there, and then get them ready to ship out. So that's what I would do. I go in early and collect the butterflies and then package them up. That was when did I do that? I think I did that. No, it was like a temporary job that I had. I think after my first year of teaching, when my health was bad, but getting a little bit better, but I wasn't quite healthy enough to work consistently. It was either that or it was one of the summers I was home from college, but I think it was just after college. Anyway, that was an interesting experience. The owner of the company, he had his master's in business administration, his MBA from Sac State, so he was a business person. But it was interesting with his work with this company. He ended up having to do a scientific experiment, because what happened was there were some groups who started to complain and started to say, well, wait a second, monarch butterflies, there are like two different types of monarch butterflies. They're the types that migrate to somewhere kind of over on the west coast. Think like um, oh no, wait a second. Where is that? I was about to say Capistrano, but that's swallows. Well, somewhere down in Mexico, I think, is where the monarch butterflies migrate to each summer, I believe. But then butterflies that are east of the Rocky Mountains have somewhere where they migrate to over on the East Coast. And some people were saying these are like two different types of butterflies. And what happens is when you release the butterflies, when you release like the West Coast type monarch butterflies east of the Rocky Mountains, you're messing up the ecosystem of the butterflies and you're messing up the monarch butterfly populations. So he ended up having to design and conduct an experiment where he put like little um like ankle bracelet kind of things on the legs of the butterflies that he released in different places, and those little things had tracking information, but then he also had like some kind of note, or he spread the word somehow for people to go to where the butterflies would migrate and to look for ones that had been tagged, and then to report to him the tagging information. And he collected all this information about which butterflies tracked where and where they were released from, and ended up doing this whole study on monarch butterfly migration that ended up getting published in the Monarch Butterfly Quarterly publication. And it's just crazy what different kind of like science journals and stuff like there are. There's the Monarch Butterfly Quarterly. But I think it's an interesting example because he was a business person and he probably thought that he never would have much use of science stuff that he might have studied. But yet, fast forward, and with his business operations, he ended up needing to conduct a scientific experiment and he needed to like make sure that he was good to go on aspects of how to set up an experiment, how to conduct an experiment, how to report on a scientific experiment. So you never know, even if you're like, I'm totally not a biology person, I like want to do business. Like you never know when something from a class that you took or something from some other field of study might end up playing a relevant role to something that you're doing. Okay, moving on though. So monarch butterflies, incomplete metamorphosis. Mosquitoes, beetles, bees, and ants all do complete metamorphosis. Um, there there was something else. Here's where sometimes I'll talk about flies and the larva of flies eating decaying organic material and how they use that for cleaning out the wounds sometimes of like severe burn victims and things like that. But I'm pretty sure we talked about that earlier in the year, so I will not take time with that. Okay, moving on. Next, we just take a quick glance at the major orders of insects and what their main characteristics are, and we watch some more videos, and that wraps it up for the chapter. So the first order we have here is order Orthoptera. So the ptera, P-T-E-R-A, think like pterodactyl. Ptera means wing. And then ortho, think like orthodontist. Ortho means correct. These are, in the Greek, the correct winged insects. These are grasshoppers and cockroaches, among other things. And main characteristics they have chewing mouth parts. What they eat is usually stuff like grass, leaves, and one pair of membranous wings, so membrane type wing, that is covered by a pair of leathery wings. And there are about 20,000 species of these. And what they usually do is they lift up their membranous wings and then they fly. They lift up their leathery wings and then they fly with their membranous wings. So, yeah, grasshoppers, cockroaches, among other things. Then order Odonata. This is dragonflies and damselflies. Dragonflies and damselflies pretty similar. One of the main differences between the two has to do with their wing orientation, and then like how they hold their wings when they're at rest, and a little bit with their body shape. But characteristic here: long, slender abdomens, a netted pair of wings, so membranous wings again, but in pairs. They have two on the left and two on the right, and then large eyes, and about 5,300 species here. And then order Coleoptera. These are the beetles, and I think, oh, is it not there? Beetles. There's a detail I wanted to mention here, but maybe it's on the next slide of content. If not, I'll say something about it. All right, couple videos. Here we go.
This pea shooter might be low-tech, but it's the perfect tool to recreate a high-speed target for our dragonfly. It fires out seeds so quickly, our eyes can't possibly see them. But is the dragonfly's vision quick enough to spot it?
We're going to have a look back at our slow motion clip.
Will the dragonfly detect the tiny pea?
The dragonfly's completely still. And the head definitely turns before we see the seed come into frame. And then the dragonfly almost takes off, but it has enough time to assess that it's not a fly, and it changes its mind and stays on its perch. That's incredible. The head definitely moves first.
The dragonfly's vision is so quick, it can track the flying object and work out it's not prey, all in less than 0.05 of a second. It's partly due to the speed at which they process information. Dragonflies experience time in a completely different way to us. They have a reaction time of 30 milliseconds, far faster than ours. The whole process of seeing a fly, taking off and catching it can happen in about the same time it would simply take us to react in any way. But there's something even more astonishing about the dragonfly's vision. To demonstrate, Patrick has a flicker book.
If I flick this book fast enough, the images begin to animate. And that's because the pages are moving so fast we hardly notice them turning. It's essentially an optical illusion.
Although our vision appears to be seamless, Our eyes actually work by capturing up to 60 images a second. Our brain then combines them to create the illusion of a continuous, moving image. Because the pages are turning faster than that, it brings the animation to life.
To a dragonfly, however, this would look completely different.
The images would appear slowed down, and it would see each individual page turning.
And that's because dragonflies see faster than we do.
Whereas we see 60 images per second, they see around 200. And so they can observe things that are just too fast for even us to process. In real time, it's impossible for us to see exactly what this dragonfly is doing. But using our high-speed camera that slows down the action 80 times, we're able to reveal the astonishing accuracy of a dragonfly's vision as it catches a tiny midge in mid-air. Dragonflies have been around for 300 million years, since before the dinosaurs. In this time, they've fine-tuned their eyes to see their world in slow motion.
So think of things like a ceiling fan or the rims of a car where it's spinning fast and you just see a blur. So because dragonflies are able to process visual information at over 3 times the frame rate, 3 times the number of images it collects per second, essentially, where we would just see a blur of spinning, they would still be able to see and track with the individual motion, or sorry, the like see the individual fan blades or the individual parts of a rim as they're spinning, and just how that enables them to track with objects that are moving fast to see and react way, way, way quicker than we'd be able to. It's really fascinating. Next two or three are a little bit longer, but I think also just super fascinating. A little bit more about dragonflies and how they're able to control their wings, and also one about the scales on the wings of a butterfly. These are smarter every day. I really like this guy and the videos that he puts out. We'll see if I'm able to keep them as part of the video or if I'll have to trim them out. But anything that gets trimmed out, I'll provide links to in the description of the video that I'm uploading so that you can still watch what might end up getting trimmed out. We'll see.
Okay, today we're going to try to figure out how Today we're going to try to figure out how dragonfly wings work. So Phil has a dragonfly that I caught last night on our night walk, and we have a high-speed camera, and we are set up with a macro lens to try to collect that exact spot. So tell me when to trigger. Let's go. You got it? Holy cow. Oh man.
Yeah?
We got it.
Oh, really good.
All right, so you have one of your entomology books here?
You know it.
Which book is this?
Horan DeLong's Intro to the Study of Insects. This is a classic entomology book. So with these guys, the muscles are actually pulling directly on the base of the wing. So it's a direct flight mechanism.
So what's an indirect flight mechanism?
Indirect flight mechanism, it actually just pulls on the body wall of the thorax, and the collapse or expansion causes the wings to then move.
So we're going to go from the rainforest to a rainy day in my hometown. Now we have all different kinds of art projects here, and the one I really want to show you is the Dragonfly Project. What they've done is they've given metal dragonflies to all the different organizations in the town, and they let them paint them however they want. What I think is cool about the dragonfly is that the wing attaches to the body in a completely different way than most insects. To explain this, I've decided to become a dragonfly muscle. This is a wasp. To see how normal insects operate their wings, we need to cut the thorax in half so we can see the muscles operating on the inside. Ugh, it's uglier than I thought. Anyway, the wings of most flying bugs use this method, which is called indirect musculature. The muscles pull on the body wall of the thorax instead of on the wing itself. The shell then pushes on the wing, which seesaws on a pivot point and moves up and down. The problem is muscles pull, they don't push. So how does the wing return? If you were to imagine that the thorax was shaped like a football, the big muscles would be squishing the ball in on the middle. When you turn it on its side, you can see that this little muscle runs the length of the football and pulls in long ways from the inside. This makes the middle bulge back out, which moves the wing down. Dragonflies, however, operate differently. When we look inside a dragonfly, we can see that they have what's called direct musculature. Their muscles pull directly on the wings and are able to operate each wing independently in both directions. This is a big deal, and this is why they completely dominate the insect flying world. If you look back at the high speed, in those little cracks, you can see muscles wiggling and pulling directly on the wings. That's pretty awesome, huh?
So, they say in many odonata, which are dragonflies, the front and hind wings move independently, and there is a phase difference in the movements of the two pairs. That is, when one pair is moving up, the other pair is moving down.
Okay, Dr. Jim Usherwood in the UK and his colleagues discovered that because dragonflies have two sets of wings, for the most part they're inefficient, more inefficient than just normal insect flight with two wings. They made a robot with two pairs of wings, and they would vary the timing between the two, and they found that at a certain timing they could get 20% more efficiency than they could with just two wings. Dragonfly wings have something on them called the pterostigma, which is Latin for wing mark. You may have seen them before. This is a dark cell on the leading edge of the wing that's heavier than the rest of the wing. At a certain velocity, thin wings begin to automatically vibrate, which makes it impossible to glide quickly. With the added weight at this particular spot on the wing, these vibrations don't start till a much higher airspeed, which means dragonflies can now move much faster. Turns out it's a complex aerodynamic structure built right into the design of the wing to help him glide. Every time I see a dragonfly, I always try to spot that spot. Wait a second. Have you ever seen a dragonfly glide? Okay, in this last video, you can see that we're in a canoe and we have a Phantom Miro high-speed camera. We're trying to capture these dragonflies as they lift up off the grass. Now, the cool thing about it is you can see that he uses his wings to hover, but he also uses them as a way of gliding. It's incredible because you can see him feather the front wing and allow it to glide the air over the second wing. I've never seen anything like this. Check it out. So I hope you learned something along with us about dragonfly flight. If you would like to subscribe to Smarter Every Day, please click the flying dragonfly here that my kids are propelling for you, and you'll subscribe. I'm Destin. Get smarter every day. Have a good one. What happened to your tooth?
Dad yanked it out and bought it for $10 and made me pay for it back.
Don't tell him what I paid for it. Stop. Stop. Okay, in this train, it's loud everywhere here. Okay, in this last video, we've got the Miro high-speed camera in the canoe, and we're looking at a dragonfly, and we get to see it lift up off a piece of grass. Dripping snot. Man, waiting on dragonflies. It's kind of boring. Hey, it's me, Destin. Welcome back to Smarter Every Day. So have you ever seen something in your life that was so incredibly beautiful that you just did not understand how it could exist in this physical world with you? And the more you get close to it, the more you study it, the more you understand that the depths of its beauty seem to never end. There's layer upon layer upon layer of beauty. Now, I know you might have a hard time understanding this because you've never met my wife, but I'll show you something that gave me a similar reaction. When I was in the Amazon rainforest, I saw butterflies in ways I had never seen them before. So when I got back home, I started to research them and found that they were of the order Lepidoptera, which is ancient Greek for scaled wing. Now, what do butterflies have to do with scales? Like fish scales. If you've ever caught a butterfly by the wings and then afterwards looked at your finger, you'll notice this shimmery dust. Those are scales, and they're really, really tiny. Now, I know a lot of you are smarter than me, and you knew that butterfly wings had scales, but I didn't. And so I started researching it, and I found this, the most beautiful image I have ever seen on the internet. This is a microscopic image of a moth in Madagascar called a sunset moth. It's amazing. Look at this. I mean, these scales are an organic structure. They were created by a caterpillar that dissolved himself in a pupa. Think about that. So you know me, the next step was to call Dr. Lyndon Gledhill and ask him to teach me the black art of taking photos of butterfly scales. We bought a microscope from the 80s, and Lyndon used the internet to teach my wife, who has a degree in biology, how to use the microscope. After that, I coupled a camera to it, and then I bought some butterflies from the internet. I'll leave the links below. So the scales of the sunset moth are the color of the rainbow, but the one spot that I want to get is right there where there's blues and purples, and they meet the yellows and the greens. That's what I'm after. So once we explore a little bit, we can find the purples right here, but we have a problem. If you'll notice, not all the scales are in focus at any one time. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to take multiple photos along that depth of field and add them all up so we get one focused image. Okay, I'm going to show you exactly how this works. I've got this over my face so I don't breathe on the butterfly wing and move it while I'm taking the images. You can see I've got the microscope set up with a remote trigger. I've got a diffuser on my main objective there, and I've got two lights going through that diffuser. You can see on my clock there, it's 10:06, and we're about to start, and you can see how long this takes. Here we go. Okay, so what time is it? It is 10:16, so it took me about 10 minutes to do that. So I took all those images, and now I'm going to use Photoshop to align the images, and then I'm going to stack them together so I have a much deeper depth of field. This is the fun part. This is where we get to see all this time that we put in yield something very, very beautiful. So we started this journey together learning about layers of beauty, right? And think about it. The fact that there are scales on butterfly wings and that they are beautiful is beautiful within itself. But it's not that I want you to see. It's the layering of the beautiful. Think about it. This caterpillar, before he went inside the pupa, he took with him a body that he dissolved, and he used that organic matter to rearrange it somehow with a software load that he took into the pupa with him to create a beautiful wing with a color structure laid out in a specific pattern. I mean, how did that software load know to make this scale one color and this scale another color? It boggles the mind, and it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. In fact, it's the second most beautiful thing I've ever seen. What do you think is so beautiful about butterfly scales?
That they change colors and all of them are not the same color.
Oh, they're not? So what do you have here?
A sign that has my name on it.
That's pretty, isn't it? There was a guy back in 1960, his name was Kjell Sandved. He was a Norwegian photographer, and he came over to the U.S., and he searched for perfect butterfly wings that would give him all the alphanumeric characters. So he created a library of all these images. You can see he's got multiple E's, multiple Y's. He created this library, and you can go and make your own name. I'll leave a link in the video description. Okay, I stumbled upon something pretty cool, so this will be the last thing I show you. See, here are all my butterflies, and I took one of the hind wings of this Goliath bird wing, and I placed it under my microscope there. So we're going to go up here, we're going to turn the video on in the scope. You can see it's black there, and then I'm going to turn the light on. Watch what happens. It's orange. Now that's interesting because the butterfly wing itself is green. What's happening? Now check this out. It gets even weirder. If I take this top-down light and turn it on, look at that. I'll turn that backlight off. green. So if I have light transmitted from the bottom of the wing, I get this orange color. However, if it's reflected from the top of the wing, I get a different color solution altogether. What's happening there? So if I've earned your subscription, please consider checking out the next video, which is me going to a biological imaging lab at Georgia State University. Good grief, they gave me goggles that look like this. Clearly we're going to do some awesome science in that video. I hope you enjoyed that, and I want to share something with you. While I was making this video, I read this book, The Fault in Our Stars by my friend John Green. Now, while I was flying, I used broken butterflies as a bookmark, which ended up being a metaphor for how the book works. There's two people in it, Augustus and Hazel Grace, and they're broken people with broken bodies, and they're trying to experience a broken world. And they do so together by unlocking the layers of beauty in the world around them. Anyway, I think you'll enjoy it, and if you want it for free, you can download it at audible.com/smarter, The Fault in Our Stars. Go check out John Green's book. I think you'll like it. Anyway, I'm Destin. You get smarter every day. Have a good one. Just because it's cool, I want to see the scales actually on my fingerprint. It's pretty awesome. So I took a lot of photos, obviously. If you want to download them and use them as a desktop background or something like that, I'll put them up on the Smarter Everyday Facebook page. There's a lot of stuff there you can check out. Thanks.
Are you doing some schoolwork?
We are.
Where are the earrings I bought you?
They're in my closet. I look awful. I feel awful. I don't feel good.
Can you put them on real quick? You know what it is?
Mm-mm.
It's a sunset moth. You know why I got you those?
Why? Because you were doing a video on it.
No, you'll find out.
Things we'd look at briefly is reflection, refraction, and interference, and how that causes the butterfly wings to create just the different light effects and the different the different colors that you can get depending on what angle you look at it, and just the vibrancy of the color, wide variety of things like that. All right, so that's that one.
Hey, it's me, Destin. Welcome back to Smarter Every Day. I'm crossing the street in Atlanta, Georgia. You can see the dome in the background, and I'm at Georgia State University, and I've got a box of butterfly wings. I'm trying to unravel a mystery that I uncovered in the rainforest. We discovered that when we dropped a butterfly and he started to fly off, pixie dust would fly off of his wings. At least that's what I call it. Check it out. We came to the Pettit Science Center here at Georgia State University. We're going to the Biological Imaging Center. Dr. Simmons, nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
I brought you some butterflies.
Oh, cool.
Ooh, so this is where you work, huh?
This is where I live.
Let's do it.
On in.
So if you watched the last episode, you're aware that these little dust particles are actually scales coming off the butterfly's wings. What we don't know, however, is how are those scales attached to the wing in the first place? Dr. Simmons happens to be an expert microscopist, and he's agreed to give us a little lesson in scanning electron microscopes. So Dr. Simmons just drew all this. I'm going to try to summarize it. You tell me if I get this wrong, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so we have tungsten up here. We start a flow of electrons here, and as it comes out, we go through what you're calling electromagnetic lenses.
Yes.
Okay, and so we vary the beam, and then we start to scan that beam across whatever it is, in this case, a butterfly wing. And so, depending on where we are in the scan, we measure how many secondary electrons we get off the sample using our electron multiplier.
This is our electron detector.
And then we run that through some filters, and we're able to get a grayscale image. Is that basically it?
That's basically it.
We are now experts on scanning electron microscopes. Would you say that?
Oh, yeah.
All right, time for science. Goggle up. Probably the coolest goggles I've ever been given, not gonna lie. Okay, here's the question. We have three different types of butterfly wings here. We have a sunset moth, which technically isn't a butterfly. we have a morpho butterfly wing, and then we have a Cythereus. What we're going to do is Dr. Simmons is going to use the scanning electron microscope to show us the difference in the wings. Now, what I think is interesting about the Cythereus is that it goes from a scaled wing to a transparent wing.
The unfortunate thing here is that this is destructive testing.
Well, it is what it is, man. We got to do it. On the scanning electron microscope, we're going to be bombarding it with electrons, and you're going to have this huge charge difference. But the problem is butterfly wings are insulators. Am I saying this right, Dr. Simmons?
You got it.
All right, so we have to discharge that voltage, or I guess it's just potential. We have to discharge that back to ground. And the way we do that is we have gold all over the butterfly wing so that it has a path to ground. Can you give me a countdown till science?
Okay, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to hit start.
Cool. So that's a gold cloud.
These are gold and palladium atoms flying around in an ionized argon atmosphere.
Looks a little different.
It's a little different. That's got a fairly heavy coating.
So that's gold.
60% gold, 40% palladium.
All right, here we go. It's taken Dr. Simmons' years of experience in biology, physics, and optics to create this. Check it out. You can see that these two butterfly scales right next to each other have different textures. The little holes in the one on the right are less than a micron across. Now, I've heard that butterfly wings are colored by holes in them, so you'd think that the one on the right is colored, right? Well, I did a little cross-check, and I figured out that the ones with the open lattice structure are actually black. Because SEM uses electrons instead of light, it can't provide color, so it's common for scientists to create false color images to help people understand what they're looking at. Check it out again, this time with false color. Okay, let's look at the morpho. You can see that the tops of the wings are blue, but the bottom has some kind of brownish tan color. If we scan it, we can see that these tan scales have small holes in them, but the blue scales have some kind of ridge in them. Now, if we measure the width of these ridges, it turns out that it's the exact same wavelength as yellow light. White light minus yellow light is equal to blue light. So somehow, these ridges are removing the yellow light and making the wing look blue. If we were to take this scale and cut it right here and go look along those ridges, kind of like we're looking through a canyon, you would see a baffled nanostructure that's amazing. As white light comes in, this nanostructure is the perfect size to interact with the wavelength of visible light and strip out the yellow. That leaves blue left, and that's where the morpho gets its color. On this Goliath birdwing butterfly, those baffled nanostructures strip out the red and the blue, which leaves you with green. After thinking about this, I realized that if I were to somehow fill up these baffles so that they couldn't interact with the light, I should be able to see the pigment of the wing as it really is instead of this pseudo color. So here we go. When I coat the wings with isopropanol, you can see that the wing loses its irradiance because these nanostructures fill up. But as soon as it evaporates off, these brilliant colors return. So there you have it. Butterflies use nanotechnology to lie about their color. But we still haven't answered our question. How are these scales attached to the wing? Like this. It's almost as if someone deliberately planted trees in a nice, evenly spaced row. I think it's beautiful. Through normal wear and tear, even aerodynamic drag along the wings, these scales are somehow plucked out of these roots, leaving these hollow stumps. So every time you rub a butterfly wing, that's what you're doing. You remember that Cythereus I was talking about, right? It's got scales on one side and it gradually fades to a transparent wing. So I took some photos under my microscope to figure out exactly what colors we should use for the false color, and I discovered that not only are there scales, but there appears to be some type of hairs. When I took it to Dr. Simmons, I learned two things. Number one, I know the color of the scales are pink because I took a picture of it, but they have those hole structures like we saw earlier. That's weird. So it looks like there's actually pigment involved. And number two, the hairs are not hairs. I mean, look at this thing. That is crazy. What is going on and why? I mean, there's a nanostructure, but it doesn't appear to be an optically driven phenomenon because this is on a transparent part of the wing. Why would the butterfly need this? I mean, the information required to build something like this and the energy that goes into something like this is incredible. So why does he need it? For just a second, let us all agree on this. Something as simple as a butterfly contains complicated mysteries that you and I will never understand. And that's beautiful. Wow, that's awesome. So thank you very much for your time. A video like this is very hard to put together, and often it requires a lot of people, like Dr. Simmons, for example, genius. There was also Laram, who colorized all the SEM images, which are on the Facebook page if you'd like to download them yourself. Also, Henry from Minute Physics. He took the time to make that zoom animation for me. I could have done that myself. That was great. Gordon wrote the music, just a lot of people. But probably most importantly is Audible.com, because they provide money for me to do things like drive to Atlanta. So they are sponsoring Smarter Every Day. So if you would consider helping Audible.com like Smarter Every Day by downloading a free audiobook, go to audible.com/smarter. Check out all their titles. There's like 100,000 of them. I was looking at one right now. The Shark's Paintbrush, Biomimicry and How Nature is Inspiring Innovation. There's some biomimicry stuff here I'm going to talk about in the next episode that I think you'll like. But anyway, more importantly, go check out audible.com/smarter. Consider downloading a book that helps Smarter Every Day out. You're smart people. You know what's going on here. Anyway, I'm Destin. You get smarter every day. Thanks for your time. Have a good one.
Did she not just say she wanted to be on the video?
If you want to get the maximum likes, you need to put me on your video.
Really? You have no idea.
There's nothing on this little caterpillar that looks even remotely like a butterfly scale. But somehow, he gels inside of his cocoon and his pupa, and he creates nanostructures. Oh, he's moving. So here he is. Oh! What are you drawing down there?
The butterfly scale.
Where are the scales at?
On the wing.
How do you know that?
You're making a video.
Right now?
Yes.
Alright, so obviously I get maximum likes now because Princess is in the video, right? Bye! Bye!
Yeah, the design of the scales and the structures within the scales and how they create the different light colors or the different colors and combinations of colors that they do and how the colors change, and it is just something else the way that's designed. All right, two quick ones about beetles. This one's called a click beetle, and you don't see it happening here, but there's some types of beetles that when they get flipped upside down, they essentially arch their back and they spring into place, and it causes them to pop up into the air in a way that they can start flying or they can land on their feet so that they're okay. And that kind of relates to what we had talked about earlier with the open circulatory system, that when insects get flipped over on their back, it interrupts the way that their circulatory system works, and it causes the blood to cease flowing throughout their body, and it can cause them to die. And so that's why you see different types of insects like freaking out when they're on their backs if they're stuck there because they're dying because their circulatory system isn't able to work. So it's a good thing we have a closed circulatory system, because if we had an open circulatory system like that, we could only orient our bodies in certain ways in order for our circulatory system to work. But anyway, this one a little, well, pretty big click beetle.
Minsan thesis. Oh, ba't nandito itong dalawa? Patay na daw?
Utang yung kinagat yung sopa.
Ang laki na niya ito suna.
Gago ka.
Ha? Huwahin ko kaya. Son, pwede bang i-stressin to?
Huwag.
Ang dami pa ng klase na, no? Nakita ko doon, Son. Gaganda na itsura ng iba eh. Wala na pala snakehead dito.
Give you a pretty good idea of this one. This of that last one. This one I'm going to show just the first little bit. This is probably about reaching the maximum size that insects can get, and in this case, this is huge beetle. So here we go.
Puti ka ba? Se está enojando, man. Ano?
All right, yeah, there we go. Order Coleoptera. I had started that at the bottom of the previous slide. I forgot to erase it from the previous slide because I had it here. The beetles or order Coleoptera, they're known for their horny wings, again, thicker, tougher, exoskeleton type material wings, but then also having membranous wings and also having chewing mouth parts. And there are 360,000 different species of beetles. And that makes the beetles or order Coleoptera the order of insect that has the most different species. There are more different types of beetles than there are any other kind of insect. And then order Lepidoptera, butterflies and moths. We saw some stuff about butterflies in one of the previous videos. And the main characteristic here is the scale-covered wings. Lepidoptera, I think literally means scale. Yeah, it literally means scale wings or scaled wings, scaled wings. So that's them. About 165,000 species of butterflies and moths, but about 85% of them are moths. So leave about 15% butterflies. Moths, one of the big things that you can use to identify a moth versus a butterfly is moths usually have kind of furry antennas, whereas butterflies do not have furry type antennas. And then another order is order Hymenoptera, and this has bees, wasps, and ants in it. And it might initially seem like ants seem really different from bees and wasps. But if you look at the type of ants that fly, then they are a lot more similar. And the main characteristic here of order Hymenoptera are the membranous wings, so the membrane type wings. Let's see, what to say about bees and wasps. Oh, interesting little tidbit. I don't know if this is still the case because this is going back several years now. But I know not too long ago there were, at least the state of Montana was allowing people to own flamethrowers, whereas usually it's not legal to own a flamethrower. But the reason why is there's a type of wasp that was coming down from Canada and was gradually invading down into the United States, and it's a very aggressive, very dangerous kind of wasp. And they found that the most effective way of destroying colonies of these wasps is to use a flamethrower. And so Montana legalized owning flamethrowers to help people combat these wasps making their way down from Canada. Bees, obviously, you know them for making honey, and their hexagon-shaped honeycombs. Pretty fascinating how bees communicate with each other. They do this like dance kind of a thing. I used to show a video sometimes about it, where they would wiggle their bodies and rotate to the left or to the right, and based on like how many times they turned and then how they wiggled their body, they were communicating to the other bees in the hive of, hey, here's approximately how much nectar I found, and here is where to go in order to find it, so that the other bees could go out and could get the nectar as well. Let's see, 120,000 species of bees, wasps, and ants. And other than a couple of videos that I have to show, I think that's all I'll say about them for now.
Impossible? We thought so. Unimaginable? We thought that too.
We count.
You what?
Like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Let's say this desert ant wants to go here
for lunch.
Champity champ champ champ.
Because she's in the desert, there is no scent trail, so how does our little ant find her way home?
I know.
Well, some German and Swiss scientists think that ants have pedometers in their brains.
Yeah.
Meaning maybe there are brain cells inside a desert ant that record every step the ant takes as she walks out.
6, 7, 8, 9.
And then when it's time to go home, they just reverse and count backwards.
5, 4, 3.
It's a nice idea, but how do you prove it? Okay, scientists designed an ingenious experiment.
Yeah.
Yes, which lets us literally see these pedometers at work. So we'll take an ant, we'll call it...
Ant number 1.
Okay, so ant number 1, we want to watch you take 10 steps to the food source.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And then 10 steps home.
10, 9, 8, 10, 11, 12.
Now, could you just go back to the apple?
Okay.
Thank you. Now, ant number 2. She also marched to the food source, but when she got there, they grabbed her and super glued little pig bristles. They're kind of like stilts. So now she's a much taller ant, and therefore every step she takes will be that much longer. Careful, careful.
Is this absolutely necessary?
And finally, ant number 3. She also walks 10 steps to the food. Again, they grab her. This time they do something a little gruesome.
What do you mean gruesome?
We're cutting your legs off at the knees.
What? Yeah.
Sometimes we've all got to make small sacrifices for science, so because your legs are now much smaller, from now on, every step you take will be much shorter.
I feel all stumpy.
Okay, now comes the fun part. When everybody was ready, the ants were released, off they go, and here's what happened. The stilty ant, she walked 10 steps home and stopped. No, you're not.
What?
Because each of her steps is now so much longer, she'd gone right past the entrance.
What the?
The stumpy ant, she also walked 10 steps home and stopped.
I know.
But because each of her steps is now so much shorter, she only got part way back.
I want my legs back.
Sorry. And the last ant who was left alone, she gets home with no problem, strongly suggesting that all these ants were somehow counting their steps. And just in case you're not convinced, that same day scientists move all 3 groups of ants back into the nest for the night. And the next day, all the ants were marched off to get food using their new legs. The stumpies took lots of steps. The stilties took fewer steps. The regulars took regular steps. And when it was time to come home, all the ants, all 3 groups went straight home. Their pedometers apparently had adjusted to their new leg size. So ants, it really seems hard to avoid this conclusion,
I know.
do have pedometers in their heads, or another way to say it is...
Ants count.
Yeah.
I want my legs back.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
Yeah.
Creatures that were once living on the forest floor now need to find other ways of getting around during the flood. The busy life of a fire ant colony has to carry on regardless. By linking legs, the worker ants create a living raft, supported by the surface tension of the water. Free now to move through the forest, these vicious stingers make the most of the flood. They use it to spread to other parts of the Amazon. On this lifeboat, the queen and her young need to be kept safe and dry. but there's no getting away from hungry fish.
Once in the open river, they are at the mercy of the current and unpredictable waves. If they are lucky enough to hit land, the soggy ants disentangle and disembark, unloading the family as they go. After a little toweling off, the worker ants soldier on, carefully guiding their queen to safety.
Okay, moving on. Order Diptera. I mean, given the etymology, it seems like it should be Diptera, because terra again, wing, di meaning two. These are flies, mosquitoes, and gnats, and mainly known for their two wings. I think they initially start out with two on each side, but then the hind wings, as the insect develops, the rear two wings basically become non-existent and partially develop into other structures. All right, flies. All right, so think of like the house fly. I mean, they can do what? I think it's 30 different diseases plus several different parasites that they can transmit to humans. And main reason why is they really like to land on stuff like animal feces. And then they also really like to land on stuff like your food. So, I mean, thankfully, between just our immune system as well as how the fact that a fly here and there landing on your food isn't going to do a whole lot. Uh, there's yeah, not a huge chance like, oh no, a fly land on my food, I'm gonna get a disease. Plus, those stats are including things like species of flies that flat out just are known for disease-causing flies, like the tsetse fly, for example, is one that very frequently transmits a particular disease. And then mosquitoes. So flies, they feed basically by ejecting saliva that has a very potent amount of digestion ability in it, and it liquefies what is wanting to eat, and then it uses a siphon-like projectile to siphon up or to suck up the digested food. Mosquitoes. So we usually think of mosquitoes as mosquitoes biting you and drawing your blood. And yes, that is a thing, but that is just the female mosquitoes getting blood just for the sake of feeding their young. So the main food source of mosquitoes is actually nectar from plants. And from that standpoint, male mosquitoes are the main nectar collecting mosquitoes. And they're actually responsible for a lot of flower pollinating, a lot of plant pollination, just like you would think of as bees. So, for example, the orchid is one of the flowers that relies predominantly, if not exclusively, on male mosquitoes to pollinate them. And with the mosquito bite, what happens is when the female mosquito goes to inject her kind of like needle like projection to suck some of your blood, she emits some of her saliva, which has anti-coagulation properties. It keeps your blood from clotting. So the blood stays nice and liquidy for the sake of siphoning it up. And most people are a little bit allergic to that anticoagulant, and that's what makes a mosquito bite itch. And yeah, about 120,000 different species of flies, mosquitoes, and gnats, and a couple of videos about them. And that just about wraps it up.
The long proboscis secretes digestive enzymes that liquefies the food and then absorbs all the resulting nutrients.
Long before there were skyscrapers and strip malls and combination Pizza Hut Taco Bells, nature had its own architects. All kinds of creatures create all kinds of structures for living, raising kids, or maybe just the occasional hookup. But centimeter for centimeter, some of the mightiest and most delightfully complex structures ever built have been erected by insects. For example, let us consider the geometry of bees. You have seen the wondrous creation that is the honeycomb, where bees store their honey, and you've probably noticed its perfect symmetry, each cell having 6 edges, all less than 1 millimeter thick, meeting at exactly an angle of 120 degrees. But do you know why they chose the hexagon for this structure? Your math teacher does. It's all about maximizing efficiency. For each gram of wax that a bee produces to build a honeycomb, it needs to consume at least 6 grams of honey. So bees need the perfect shape that can be repeated endlessly over a flat area, and there are only 3 shapes that can fit together without leaving gaps: squares, equilateral triangles, and hexagons. And it turns out hexagons have a smaller total perimeter than either triangles or squares, which means that you could fit a lot more of them in a given area. Ancient Greek scientists predicted this more than 2,000 years ago, but it wasn't until 1999 when University of Michigan mathematician Thomas Hales wrote a 19-page proof that the hexagon is more compact than we knew for sure. You may also be familiar with termites, probably in a negative connotation, but it's hard not to respect these insects for the mounds that they sometimes build. There are more than 1,000 species of termites, and several species in Africa and Australia have constructed mounds that surpass 9 meters in height. If humans were to build a skyscraper on that scale, it would be more than 1.5 kilometers high. But as impressive as this is, the real genius of termite architecture is that the mounds feature a ventilation system so efficient that humans are actually copying it. Termites require the inside of their homes to maintain a constant temperature of 30.5 degrees Celsius. Why? Because termites are also fungus farmers. They grow it as one of their major food sources. Because outside temperatures in both Africa and Australia can vary between 2 and 40 degrees Celsius, the termites construct a system in and around the mound so that the internal temperature always stays the same. Using vents and channels that can be regulated throughout the day, air comes in at the base of the structure and is sucked down into tunnels with muddy walls. As the air moves through the tunnels of wet mud, the air temperature is lowered through evaporative cooling. Meanwhile, warmer air inside the mound is drawn up by convection currents and escapes through the opening, or flue, at the very top. If the temperature gets too hot or cold, the termites can easily dig new vents or plug up old ones in order to regulate their climate. In Zimbabwe, the country's largest shopping and office complex is modeled on this design. With no conventional air conditioning or heating system, the Eastgate Center was built with thick concrete walls that have high heat capacity. The building draws in outside air through fans in the first floor and is warmed or cooled depending on which is hotter, the concrete or the air. At night, the warm air is vented out through chimneys, just like in the termite mound. Finally, we could spend entire episodes talking about spider structures and the science of silk, but I have to tell you how in 2007 a 180-meter-long spiderweb came to be at Lake Tawakoni State Park in East Texas. Spiders tend to be pretty territorial, sometimes even cannibalistically territorial when it comes to building webs for catching food. But something interesting happened in 2007, a particularly wet summer that resulted in a major surplus of mosquitoes, crickets, and caterpillar larvae. Instead of fighting over the abundance of food, millions of spiders from at least a dozen species cooperated by creating a sheet web to catch food collectively. While not unprecedented, this cooperative web building is extremely rare and also, as you can see, really creepy. That web in some places, was thick enough to block out the sun. Hopefully, that's not too creepy. And thank you for watching this episode of SciShow. If you have any questions or comments for us, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter, and of course down in the comments below. And if you wanted to continue getting smarter with us, you can go to youtube.com/SciShow and subscribe.
All right, so there you go. Hope this glimpse of insects and, in general, arthropods was interesting, was fascinating, that you learned some stuff, that you found some stuff is like, whoa, that's pretty cool. I never realized that. Yeah, you have a greater appreciation for the variety, the complexity, the ingenuity, and a wide variety of things like that. So, again, hope you're doing well. That does it for biology through the rest of this week, and then you have spring break, and we will pick things up with a new kind of animal, getting into vertebrates after spring break. And yeah, that does it for now. All right, thanks. Bye.